Hello, and welcome to Medium 2, where we talk with writers on Medium. And today we have Brian Kean, which I am so excited about. I figured I'd get Brian maybe like the 99th guest or the 100th guest, but here he is. So thank you,
Hello. Thank
Brian.
you, Max. Thank you.
So just to get some general questions out of the way for viewers who don't know who Brian is, why did and how did you start writing on Medium?
I started writing before COVID. I wrote a few, and it just wasn't getting traction. I was very busy traveling for work. But then when COVID started, and I was living in St. Petersburg, Russia, like many, I figured, okay, you know what? I have time on my hands. I'm working from home. I have that extra time that I'm not commuting, and so I decided to start writing about the COVID period, about the Trump period, and about the craziness we saw going on with, used Clorox or whatever else. And I just couldn't, sit there quietly. But at the same time, I wanted to share a little bit about my experiences in Russia, which then, even though some were negative, they were negative with love. They were negative in the sense that, you know, you sort of sharing experiences about your child, not in a bad way, but in a way that you want the rest of the world to understand your child. So I felt it almost like an obligation to get out this message about the country I'm stuck in for COVID. I've been living in Russia since 1994. First went there in 1990 when it was Leningrad, and all the years of hearing people talk about the crime in Russia is so bad. No, it's not. Hearing about all the craziness, the misperceptions of what is Russia, and I thought, okay, COVID's a great time for me to tell people about Russia. And I personally feel that the government in St. Petersburg did a fairly decent job, keeping people in their homes, isolating a bit, and then letting people also get out during COVID. So it was a very responsible approach to COVID, I felt. So I wanted to also share that with the world, seeing the craziness in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean the first article I definitely want to talk about, and we'll have a link
Sure.
below. Just you want to go read this article, and I hadn't read it in a while, but I remembered the stuff that you'd written. So I started reading you. I'm pretty sure before the
Uh-huh.
war, and I didn't think it would happen because it just made no economic sense to
Right.
me. But what I think doesn't make a difference. But when it did happen, I mean, I agreed with exactly why you didn't say that it was going to happen, but you basically said in that article, this is how Putin thinks. This is how everything works over there. And as I sent you an
Yep.
email, you did everything in the article, but give the date and time. I mean, if you followed your
Yeah.
logic, like if I said if somebody said to me, okay, Max, uh, pretend that the economic issue, that the economic rationale has nothing to do with it. What do you think will happen? I would have agreed with you
Right.
100%. So I thought maybe you could just talk about that
Sure.
piece, which again, anybody watching this, go read this. This is before the invasion. And it is just, and I think that people, we'll get, I guess, again, get this later, but people still do not get it. What you said back then, I do not see mainstream media picking up on, and that must be extraordinarily
It
frustrating to
is.
you.
It's very frustrating. And I had to go back and read that article because a lot of what is in there, I also continually put into articles I write, articles I'll write next week. I'll still be taking bits and pieces from that because this is the misperception and the inability to understand Russia. There's this belief that Russia's like everybody else. There's this belief that they have the same sort of rational approach to building their country that other countries have. Russia, the average Russian is rational. Collectively, I find them irrational, just because they're accepting this whole. war. And people say, well, what can they do? Well, a lot of countries do a lot of things when they don't agree with what's going on. We see it in France. We see it all over the world. There's protests about, change. In France, I think recently there was a lot of protests about increasing the retirement age. And the country came to a standstill. That's a retirement age. This is a war. This is invading your neighbor, your brother, your cousin. And, what are you going to do? Well, it's kind of cold. So I'm going to go home. So that approach was sort of, you have an entire country doing their survival thing. You have the average Russian is not involved ever in local government. There is no such thing as local government. People who call me an idiot when they write onto my articles, they post, they go, you know nothing about Russia. I go, okay, so 30 years I've been living in a cocoon, asleep, I guess. I haven't learned a thing in 30 years, Okay, so I don't know anything. But they'll go, there's local government, there's local, they vote. It doesn't matter. What happens locally is all irrelevant. Nothing really happens. And so Russia, even in their local newspapers, their little regional city newspapers, they're talking about international events. Or they're talking about the woman who just turned 102. They go from the woman who turned 102 to what is Trump or Biden doing. So they always keep everything at a very international level. And that keeps everybody free of concern about local politics. So everybody's doing their thing. Then they have this Putin guy who they love him or hate him. They do kind of have respect for the fact that he is the face of Russia. And he is a tough guy, since 2000. He came in as pretty young, looked good, had a family, wife and 2 kids. And he was the symbol of what Russia could and should be. A father at home, not drinking, working. And through really nothing that he did, just through luck of the investment in the oil and gas industry, Russia started booming thanks to that. And everybody just sort of puts that, all that good stuff onto Putin. Putin did this. Putin is responsible for our wealth, our well-being. And so they're sitting around thinking, okay, we have the big guy, the Tsar, Tsar Batushka, which is the Tsar being the leader and Batushka being sort of like a father, So you have this,
right?
Father knows best. Pretty much it's like father knows best. He comes home from work and it's time for dinner. Putin says, time for us to eat, time for us to play, time for us to win gold medals. And he doesn't question whether they will win the gold medals or not. He knows they're going to win them. Look at the 2014 Olympics. I mean, where they cheated. It's all of that complete forgiveness, that expectation that, you ask the average Russian, do you think Russia cheated during the 2014 Olympics? I know. Are you familiar, Max, with how they took the samples of tainted urine? Literally, the FSB had a hole in the wall in the laboratory and took them out at night down in Sochi. And then they'd replace them with clean urine. And the guy who was in charge of this thing admitted it. He went to the West. He fled to the West. He was in hiding. He admitted that this happened. One of his colleagues who did this died of a heart attack at the dacha. I think 2 or 3 of them died at the dacha, from unexpected heart attacks. These men have been healthy their whole lives, athletes. And so Russians say, oh, okay, well, Putin, it wasn't a sense that Russia was cheating in the Olympics. It was that Putin was bringing them the gold medals, making Russia proud. So Putin has always been in this position where he's made Russia proud. So suddenly he's sitting there at Corona, he's completely, and I can tell you from being inside of Russia, we heard nothing from Putin for almost 2 years. It was phenomenal. I mean, I remember looking at the New Year's, every New Year's at 12 o'clock, the president of the country says, guys, this past year was tough. We're going into the new year. Let's all do it together. Let's be together. Let's be one. You know, Slava Россия. Hail Russia. Love Russia. Blah, blah, blah. Happy New Year. I was actually in Frankfurt in the airport. My family was in St. Petersburg. I had to go back to Vegas for a conference. And I remember asking my wife to put the camera from the hotel in Frankfurt onto the TV so I could watch Putin's speech. At 00, 2021 to 2022. And I was actually felt a tinge of pride, thinking he led us through. And I felt like, because like I said, I was there for 19 months. I hadn't left the country. And I felt like he led us through this COVID period, and he was off the radar. But apparently, he was off the radar, but he was back in his dacha, sitting there with his buddy, Sergei, the defense minister, drinking tea, hunting, and talking to right-wing nationalists, ultra-nationalists, about how Russia's being, offended. The constant sense that poor little Russia is offended by the world. The world is always out to get and hurt Russia. And the average Russians, though, lost this sense. They were living, surviving, doing well, in a sense, thriving during COVID. There were no shortages, really, of any products in Russia because they had done an import replacement. So you didn't have people hoarding paper towels. I think we had more German beer during COVID than we had before COVID. I mean, it was amazing. I was actually having a great time, and I love German beer. And so you have all this goodness going on, and then Putin comes out of, just sort of emerges from the lair and says, but wait a minute, Ukraine is causing us problems.
So when did you think, when did the red flags first go up for you about, because they first started, massing these troops at the border, but was there anything that he had said before then or did?
It was just his whole demeanor that I saw him really doubling down on the lunacy, because no one expects, nobody. I don't care. You can hit someone with a cinder block, and they could have a concussion for a week. They will still wake up, and they will never tell you that Ukraine is going to invade Russia. But he was so insistent on that. And like he said, if you say a lie, put it out there, repeat it, and then give expanding facts on that lie. So here's the lie, here are the reasons why it's accurate, and keep expanding so that by the time it starts to sink in and people start to believe the lie, the actual lunacy of the lie, the original lie, is forgotten. We're now in a place where they're assassinating our people, they're genociding. Suddenly, I'm hearing from Russians in January and February of 22 about the genocide that Russia was committing against, that Ukrainians were committing against Russians in Donetsk and their fellow Ukrainians in Donetsk and Luhansk and all these places. And I'm thinking, whoa. There was
they were talking about the Azov battalion being Nazis.
The Azov guys.
That's what I remember.
Maybe in 1941, 42, the Nazis did use some of the real ultra-nationalist Ukrainians. They ply them with vodka and say, you have to go and shoot these people, because the Germans didn't want to. The Germans were actually having problems with their own people because the men were losing their minds from killing women and children in the forest. And the Ukrainians would get drunk and go shoot them. They weren't Nazis. They were just nationalists who were drinking and who were murderers. They were murderers. They were horrific murderers.
Yeah, I just want to point out just that it's a buried part of history that the concentration camps, part of the reason the Germans built them, that I've read and I believe, is like you say, that the German officers and soldiers could not take all of the killing of these people. They were literally going insane. So they're like, well, how can we do it so it doesn't have that effect. So like, okay, well, if we build this oven and we just tell the soldier, just put them in the oven, and then tell the soldier to go away. It's just one soldier that turns on the
Absolutely.
gas. Then none of them have been psychologically
It was in a
scarred.
sense they thought of a humane way to kill 6 million people.
Right.
Humane though, not for the victims, for the killers
Right.
themselves, which is
Of course, and I think it's the same thing going on now with the Russians using all these
yeah,
prisoners, right? I
it's a
mean,
dregs of society. Put them out there.
yeah,
So
but it's not affecting the more professional Russian soldiers, the more
right,
professionals in Russia. They're not seeing it the way that
right, and
these I don't know. You know more than I
well,
know.
another
But
thing in the say January and February after Putin's New Year, Happy New Year thing. I also got this sense that he was really playing with the religion. He was really getting into the whole. So he was building all of these Stalinist sort of, even Stalin went back to Russia's past. Alexander Nevsky was the great, warrior who beat the Swedes, and suddenly Stalin was calling on religious icons, imagery, and all that to reunite, to get all the peasants, on board, and to sort of kind of forget about the Soviet stuff for a while. And Putin at the same time was, you look at him, he's with the candles and everywhere so this image of this holy Russia, and Russians will tell you, oh, we have the holiest land outside of Jerusalem. Even though most of their beautiful churches were destroyed during the communist period, even though every city had one of the cathedrals or some place was dedicated to the official museum to atheism. So this is the craziest thing, that they went from no religion to suddenly they're the most religious.
that's what I remember. I remember that the Soviet Union was very suspicious of the Orthodox
Yeah.
Church, and I remember that in the beginning that Putin also
Oh
was
yeah.
very anti-church. I mean, I'm remembering this wrong.
No.
Was that
Until
right?
he needed it. And then
Right.
when he needed to say, we are going to go to war against Ukraine, um, that's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a hard sell because Ukrainians. You scratch a Russian, they say there's a tater. You scratch a Russian,
Right.
there's a Ukrainian. You scratch a Ukrainian, there's a Russian. I mean, they're brothers. I mean, they're like
Right.
cousins, brothers. It's everybody's got a Ukrainian somewhere in their family, in the line. Um, the food culture, the Ukrainian food culture is better. It's stronger. It's better food, in my opinion. Their borscht is amazing, and their sala, their samagol, and all that stuff. But
Right.
Russians, they know each other. They love each other. So saying suddenly that we're going to invade this country, but so Russians are amazingly competent at rolling with the punches. Whatever happens, because 90% of what happens from the top, and they realize they can't do anything about it, they will bitch and moan in life. They will bitch and moan in the metro, in the mass transit. But at the end of the day, they deal with it. They're really competent dealing with it. And the aggression from dealing with it, they push onto each other. They scream at each other in the traffic. They scream at each other in the metro. They don't have any problems with getting into fights, in public space. I've been in many
But
shouting.
not over the war, just
No,
frustration.
just frustration of
Right.
but you have that aggression, that angst from the war, from whatever's happening in society, but you turn it into, you cheated me on my watermelon. My watermelon's crap, and you told me it was going to be good. And they come back and they throw the watermelon down, and I want a new watermelon. And, usually they'll get the new watermelon, but there's just always some screaming and some yelling, I've been in many a shouting match in Russia over things. And then when you're done screaming and shouting, the next time I go to the store, that woman's my best friend who works in the store. She's waving to me. Hey, how you doing? They actually like when someone pushes back.
Right.
unfortunately, most people don't push back. So most people just kind of, what am I going to do?
So if I
You
could like
know,
sort of sum up your argument, not sum up, but sort of just, so Putin, I agree, goes mental during the pandemic.
yeah,
And what I also find interesting is I think that many men who are our age see exactly, because we're all fighting going into this sort of very bitter, um, bitter sort of cold, callous way of looking at the world as you get older, as an
right.
older man. You know, your virility, you know, all this stuff. And so we have this guy that he goes crazy like that. He feels he is not getting the respect he deserves. The world
Right.
isn't working the way he wants it to work. And I think all 60-year-old men feel the same way. In
Sure.
fact, I relate. I think a lot of the stuff that he says, not a lot, but some of the stuff he says, I think is true. But I won't get into that. Um, anyway, so you have that. He starts the war. The West says we're going to do sanctions. And what you're telling me and what I'm seeing is that they've worked around the sanctions. So the sanctions are now meaningless. Now, people had said that 2 years ago, and I used to argue with them, but they were right. I mean, I'm wrong. I mean, it's just so he wants Ukraine. There's no way for a man like that, and this is what you pointed out in this original article. He's never going to back down. He'll win or you'll kill him. There's
Yeah.
no like, he doesn't think in a negotiating way the
No.
way other people do. And in the Oliver Stone interviews, you can see this very clearly. I mean,
Yeah.
he says it. It's not like Putin's like, I'll say one good thing about him. It's not like he's ever like not expressed himself.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not like I don't feel like he's duplicitous in a sense. You know, he's basically said, you know, he came out with the 7 things about NATO. I'm not saying that if they did them, he would have, but you know, anyway.
He's been doing a Mein Kampf for the past 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
A podcast of the Putin Mein Kampf without the admitting to the desire to murder his neighbors, you know, genocide his neighbors. And the Putin said an amazing thing at the beginning of the war. I'm sending these guys to the front from the countryside, the Derevnya, and they're going to die as heroes. If I didn't do that, they would be dying from drunkenness, alcoholism, in the mud puddle back in the country, in the melting snow, drinking antifreeze. So I'm saving them. I'm actually making them glorious.
But he's not like 100% wrong, right?
What's that?
He's not like completely wrong.
He's not, because, I mean, as horrible as it sounds and as un-PC as it may seem, 90% of the guys back in those villages can't drink alcohol anymore, or they shouldn't be drinking alcohol because they probably are alcoholics. And a lot of them do drink it on the holidays. Like the biggest day of the year to get hammered is March 8th, Women's Day. And it's a big joke. The guys wake up in the morning, give the wife the flowers. Oh, honey, you're so beautiful, so amazing. And then the toasts start at work. And by the time they get home to celebrate with their wives, they're wrecked, you know. And that's International Women's Day. And so if you've ever been to the countryside, I mean, there's nothing to do. There's not employment. There's no gainful employment. There might be a job, you know, a gig. They've been gigging for the past 30 years. You know, we built a factory in the south of Russia in a place, Stanitsa, they call them, these little sort of like town that's like a city. And we had a celebration for the workers. And we ran out of vodka. And by the time I got to the party, I was in charge of the whole factory. We ran out of vodka, and so next thing I didn't realize I was getting the bad vodka that's made in the basement around the corner.
They're swapping it out.
Within 10 minutes, I was unconscious on the floor from this. It was like an antifreeze or something, and I woke up like a day and a half later with this like gash on my head. I don't remember anything. And they're saying, "Oh, you're lucky you survived," because
Sounds like
this is something 40,000 a year die. These are some numbers from Russia from drinking bad vodka. Um, Thousands more go blind from bad alcohol. So Putin's saying, "I'm going to turn you into a hero." So he has an unlimited number of potential heroes that he can save by standing to the front. And that when they conscripted like 300,000 from the cities, that was kind of a mistake. Actually, a typical Russian approach to the whole thing was no one was ready for it. Suddenly, you saw the pictures of the people sleeping in like the guys who were taken literally from the streets to the camps outside the big cities, and they didn't even have mattresses to sleep on. There was no food really. The parents were bringing food to feed them. And typical Russia, they don't plan. They just, okay, we have to do this. And then it becomes this like, who can get the most? Oh, we got 1,000, I got 2,000, and you get an award. You know, the local governor sends you a case of vodka for the holidays because you got the most people. And so Putin's looking at it this way. All right, I'm not going to mess with the people in the cities. I'm not going to mess with the middle class or with the mamas and grandmas and grandpas who are sitting home, you know, waiting for their sons to return for the holidays. We're going to get them from the countryside. And there's millions more where the dead who are now dead in Ukraine, there's millions more that can die. And
well, right. So, I
Ukraine
mean,
doesn't have that many.
if that's true, why doesn't the West just stop giving weapons to Ukraine? It's hopeless.
Because then you've justified. In a sense, I don't know what I've written in the past about how Ukraine should consider. Look, if Luhansk, if Donetsk and these areas don't want to be a part of Ukraine, why force them? You know what I'm saying? Because you're getting to the point where Russia has more people who can die than Ukraine does. And we're never going to give Ukraine enough weapons where they can just suddenly, in a month, overwhelm the Russian army. If they didn't overwhelm them this past summer and this past fall, no weapon is going to suddenly change the whole thing. And you know, all these people who read Jane's military books and the military guys, I'm not one of those military bloggers. Occasionally I'll write about some weapons. I'm more about the aspect of the people and the culture. And I don't believe there's any one weapon that anybody can give that's going to change this suddenly throw this out. This is World War. Okay, someone said, I recently read where, don't compare this war with World War I. I don't agree. We're at the stalemate like we are in World War I. And someone comes up with, the Russians are coming out with these cluster bombs, these gliding cluster bombs that they say could really cause damage. Sure, it will. And then the Ukrainians will adjust, and then they'll do something. And all we're going to see is more death, more death, more death. And then Russia's going to occasionally save up some missiles, fire them into Kiev over New Year's and Christmas, and we're going to see more dead, God forbid, women and children. And when does it end? So you know, God forbid, should you say there should be a compromise somewhere, a consideration. But then everybody says, well, we've said to Russia, way to go. You did this. I'm sorry?
Yeah, I mean, I was just sort of, it's more of a rhetorical question than what I think we should do. I mean, I've said from the beginning, well, not the beginning, but after I sort of got an idea of what things were going, that, you know, Ben Hodges is, I think, is the only one former military that's been saying the same thing. Like, you know, you've got to arm them, or you've got to, you got to do what it takes to make them win.
Yeah.
Anything else is just a waste of life. And
it's just gradualism.
Yeah. There's even just last night before, I don't know his name, but you might know who he was, but he was an economist who worked with Putin in the late 90s, I think. And he basically said that from his analysis that Russia's spending 15 billion a month on the war, and Ukraine, the whole West, he said at best is 5 billion. He said,
Yeah.
if you look at history, there's no way. There's no way. The only way a country can win is if it has parity in that way. Without parity, and that's sort of what I'm seeing is that you see a lot of these drone videos that are very cool to look at, but what do they mean? It's just like some lone tank somewhere, and then or some Russian soldiers running across a field. It's more sad than anything else.
Well, it's become entertainment for us. We get to watch a tank blowing up. We get to see some soldiers, and these soldiers, look, a lot of these soldiers are not avid. They don't hate Ukrainians.
No, of course not.
These are I was teaching my online class within St. Petersburg. I do it in the spring, and last semester I'm looking at some of the young men in the class, and I'm thinking, okay, you could be one of these guys running from the blowing up in the tank.
Right.
And it just, I feel badly for him. And I'm thinking this kid doesn't, there's no evil desire for him to go out. Now, the ones raping and pillaging the towns in Ukraine, sure, these are, if you look at them, quite often they're older. They might be from the prisons. But really, there has to be an understanding that this has to stop eventually. And Russia is going to be absolutely isolated for a long time. They're going to be culturally, economically isolated for generations. Obviously, when we're all long gone, eventually someone will forget this whole thing. But if this thing, and we can't let Putin stalemate this, just sort of like stop it, and then we're sitting there in this like DMZ type situation. There's going to have to be, because that only serves Russia. So and again, the haters are going to say, "Oh, how dare you?" Look, Luhansk, those far eastern parts of Ukraine, as long as I've been in Russia, and that's been for 30 years, Russians have always told me, and even Ukrainians have told me, that eastern part of Ukraine does not want to be part of Ukraine. They'd say, "Oh, they're the Russians." We were selling sukhariki, which are like the salted bread. It's like bread crisps, which they fry up and they put different flavors on them. We were selling like potato chips. That was a very popular snack. And the company was based in Moscow, and we were selling to Ukraine. We had like 5 offices in Ukraine, and even a production facility in Ukraine. And our marketing for everything but the eastern part of Ukraine had to be different from the eastern part. The eastern part was closer to the Russian style of marketing, our advertisements.
Right.
But there's one thing different. They looked at these sukhariki, and they're like little pieces of like fried bread, as something that they would give to animals, to dogs. Whereas in the rest of Russia, people love them with beer. But this is how different they were, even in that mentality. But over here, everything was in Ukrainian, Ukrainian language, and just with a whole fun sort of marketing, advertising. But this portion where Luhansk and Donetsk and all that, they were always sort of like this more, we want to be Russia, we don't want to be Ukraine. But we're not totally Russian, but we want to be separate, sort of. So I even wrote an article saying, let's make it like South Tyrol, the Südtirol, the section of northern Italy and southern Austria. At the end of World War I, when the Italians saw the writing on the wall and they were losing, they suddenly joined the Allies. So they stopped being Germany's ally. They joined the Allies, and they went to war against Austria. And they took a beautiful, beautiful portion of Austria. And if you go to the Südtirol, the capital city there is Bolzano or Bolzens, you have it's some of the most beautiful part of Europe. Absolutely, it's just so beautiful. The Dolomites are the mountains there, and they speak. It's part of Italy, but they speak mostly German and Italian. And they don't even use olive oil. They just use butter. They cook like pasta with butter.
Right.
So everything is just, it's a beautiful combination. But they have an independent sort of like republic that does belong to Rome, to Italy, but they can also vote on their own things. And they could do something like this with the whole eastern part of Ukraine. Create it like an international, sort of like it's not Ukraine, it's not Russia, but it's self-administered with their own government, and stop this bloodshed, and then rebuild your countries and your cultures based on that, because the world is not letting Russia back in for a long time.
Well, I think, and I agree that everybody, like what you outlined, I think it is logical and makes sense. The problem is not with Putin. I think everybody agrees that that's possible, but not even this guy. I told you, this Russian guy was like, you can't trust him. He will never honor any agreement whatsoever. So,
but even Zelensky says he will not accept. He will only accept all of Ukrainian territory back. I think Crimea should go back to Ukraine. I don't believe that the Crimeans were, the ones that were thrilled over Russia taking over were the grandmas and grandpas in the Soviet generation. The ones who probably weren't doing so well, economically, the generation that was sort of needs the handouts of Moscow. Ukraine, they were struggling economically. They could give them good handouts, and there's something about Russians and Ukrainians. They are used to, from the Soviet Union, to always getting something. The government is supposed to give you. You ask, what can you give me? They don't ask what I can give you.
Right.
Whereas in the States, the mentality is first, can I do this? And then you're delighted when you find out the government can give you something or can help you. And over here, I've seen it here when the people setting up new lives here in Portugal. The Russians are phenomenal. They're so adept at finding out what they can get from the Portuguese government, for nothing. And
right.
I sit around and go, whoa. As an American, I don't even think of that. If I need something, I think, okay, how can I work to get this or that? Right. And they've got a list of things, we can get this for free, this for free, this for free. So that might have been the generation in Ukraine that was in Crimea that was sort of like, oh yeah, Russia's here, more money, more freebies.
Right.
But the eastern part, let it go. This thing has to stop. There's not, like you said, there's not going to be any one miracle weapon. And the big fear is, okay, could a nuclear war happen? Could there be a nuclear accident?
Right.
These are the concerns. And I wrote an article where I said, do I want the world to blow up over Eastern Ukraine? This is like the question, was the West ready to go to war over Czechoslovakia in World War I, or World War II? No. Sudetenland was not the reason to go to war. Poland eventually became the reason. Okay? That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Is Eastern Ukraine, where the majority says they don't want to be part of Ukraine, the straw that breaks the camel's back? The straw that blows up the world? Look, I don't want to end life over that portion of the world.
Right.
And nothing good is going to come out of this continual, let's keep shooting each other, blowing things up, shooting each other, put in another generation of young men. And like I said, Russia has millions more. So
where do you, let's, I guess, probably close out this first episode. Where do you see things? Well, I guess my first question is, let's just say Putin disappears tomorrow. Do you believe that Ukraine and Russia could come to an agreement that you've just outlined?
I think if he disappeared tomorrow, I think there could even be, I think Zelensky's desires could be fulfilled to get all of Ukraine back. because I mean, unless even with this, mentioned in one article where it's not going to be anybody from this inner circle. It's going to be someone from outside the circle who would replace Putin.
Right.
Because there's too many. They're all fighting for that position, so none of them is going to let the other one get it.
Right.
Obviously, Medvedev is just an idiot, so he'll be
so
nowhere.
Just be like Putin, because he was an unknown too in the beginning.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and he was actually normal. He was actually not a bad president.
Right.
And then he's just now fighting for relevance.
Right.
He's saying, "Look at me, I'm the craziest. So you won't kill me," because he doesn't want to fall from a 25th floor of some building. So he's like, "I'm crazy. I love you. Let's blow things up." But I think Putin vanishes tomorrow. Obviously, there'll be this silence. We won't know for a while, and then possibly one of these oligarchs will remember that they're all tough guys until something like this happens, and then they vanish off into their beautiful palaces, and they're all living well right now, the ones that are still alive. And so one of them could put in the reformer, because the mood among the oligarchs, and I know a couple, and I've heard them. I haven't spoken directly. I'm not picking up the phone and calling them, but I've heard from people who visit them and gone to their lairs and spent time with them. They all are upset about this loss to the world. They realize that they're cut off. They realize that as being Russians, they're not coming back. ESG purposes, companies, investors are not going to put money into them or Russia because of this whole war. So one of them could sponsor a reformer who can get in there and make peace and real peace with Ukraine. Suddenly doors will start to open again much faster than, they could say, look, we were held hostage by this fascist revolution in Russia, and now me and my buddies freed Russia, so help us rebuild. Help us rebuild this democracy in a real way. Soros tried it years ago, and then Soros became the whatever for nut jobs all over the world,
right.
Including many in Russia. So I could see that that would be the ultimate. I think that'd be the best way, because look, I don't want to see Russia isolated forever, but if they go a soft route with a post-Putin, someone sort of like Putin-esque, isolate the hell of them. Keep them off the radar. Turn it into North Korea. I don't care. It'll never go as far as North Korea, just because it's a different cultural mindset than North Korea. But potentially get a nice reform in there, get an oligarch in there who could put in someone smart, someone young, someone who knows international law, and someone who's willing to say, which Russians never can say, we screwed up. Hey guys, we're sorry. They've never said that about World War II. They never said that about Stalin. They failed to understand that they began the war as an ally of Nazi Germany. They were allied with Germany. They divided Poland. They killed hundreds of thousands of Poles, sent them to the camps, and then suddenly they go, oh, and then they were invaded. And we all forget about that little period there. So come to the table, apologize, and be real, reformist. And
all right, well, I think that's a positive thing we'll get on this video.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Brian, for joining us. I can't wait to our next conversation.
Sure. I'm sure we'll have plenty of reasons to speak again.
Thanks.
Okay, Max. Thank you.